Witchcraft has always been a fascination to many goers, especially during occasions like Halloween. Witches always fascinates us in such ways, especially with their sorceries and how they like to torment their victims in the night. So why not capitalize on it by making a sitcom with a teenage girl that gets into all sorts of predicaments? Originally airing on ABC in 1996, Sabrina the Teenage Witch focused on Sabrina, a 16-year-old teenager with an unbelievable ability in the art of witchcraft, implementing him in all sorts of situations, while contending to her 600 years old aunts Hilda and Zelda, as well as the show's iconic talking black cat, Salem. After 4 seasons, the show was picked up by the WB for an additional 3 seasons, although the ratings weren't very high compared to its time on ABC. Even though it seemed like a show for girls around the time, I actually enjoyed it. The humor was solid, if cheesy at times, and the cast was splendid, with Melissa Joan Hart at her best. Given the success of the show, merchandise of course was right around the corner, which brings us to the main reason for this entry: video games. Now, most of the Sabrina video games were released on PC, with one other on the Game Boy Advance. However, the one we're looking at is Sabrina, A Twitch in Time for the PlayStation 1. Now, unlike the PC games that were basically point-and-click interactions, A Twitch in Time for the PS1 is a 3D adventure game where you assume the role of Sabrina. The story that's detailed in the manual has a 4-page dialogue that is essentially, Salem messed with what the game calls the cosmic clock, which maintains the time-space continuum. As a result, this releases the game's antagonist, Chaos, from his prison, and in return, steals objects from various time periods and scrambles them, as well as shattering the clock, causing twitches in time itself. Not to mention that Salem has been reduced to a space bubble drifting through time. I don't know, it seems kinda confusing. As Sabrina, your objective is to go through all 4 time periods to gather the missing objects and return them to their respective locations. When you begin the game, you start at the base of operations, in this case, the Cosmic Cog. The first time period you travel to is the Stone Ages, and from there you collect the missing clock pieces to access other locations in conjunction to obtaining the missing artifacts. These artifacts are primarily used to form platforms to reach certain items. In each time period, there are 3 parts with 1 clock piece in each level, and a boss battle at the end. Throughout these levels, you have to contend with an array of enemies corresponding to the time period you're in. To combat these foes, you have Sabrina's traditional finger-pointing zap beam power as your primary weapon, along with her spell book containing 6 spells. Yeah, out of all the spells that is probably infinite to the witchcraft universe, she only gets 6. Each spell allows 5 shots before running out, meaning that these spells are not synced as 1 meter, which is very pleasing to see. You have spells from the Flibbity Ribbit, which reduces enemies to frogs, to Up, Up, and Away, which blast enemies up into space. While half of these spells are useful, the others only have a temporary effect and are mainly used for gags. While strange and a bit hilarious at first, their charm dissolves very quick as they more or less stun the enemies. Each level have checkpoints which are represented as zippers, with Salem in a bubble assisting Sabrina with very vague and useless hints. And when I say useless, I mean extremely useless.
Back and forth, eh?
Sabrina, I'm back! Oh, joy! Oh, rapture! Where's the tuna?
You'll also come upon a variety of colored diamonds. These diamonds are used as the only way to obtain new outfits from Diva at the Cosmic Cog. It sure sounds familiar to what Barbie would do. Looking at you, you explorer. The appeal of these outfits is pretty questionable. For example, when feudal Japan is involved, I would never think that Sabrina would look amazing in a mixed indigo green ninja costume with an ugly ponytail. Was a traditional kimono too subtle for her? It's not just the ninja outfit, but all 4 of them don't look very good. The only reason to have these outfits is to gain access to a special portal in each period that corresponds with what Sabrina is wearing. The problem is that these portals don't show you visually which outfit you need, so you can end up getting an outfit you think would grant you access, but once reaching the portal, it turns out to be the wrong one, so it's back to the closet. On the plus side, once you've completed a timeline, you'll be able to revisit the level of that period without going through the whole thing. These portals contain clock pieces to assemble the cosmic clock, as well as unlocking new locations. The combat is as basic as you can get. As mentioned, you only have the Zap Finger and Spellbook at your disposal. It's actually disappointing not to have a huge variety of magical attacks, considering how much the TV series showed off. To be fair, most of the times the spell projectiles you fire will hit their marks as long as you have an enemy to look towards at a close distance, so it's nothing really to write home about. The enemy AI is very mixed. Most of them are not too bright, and when they are, they can either give you some trouble or they'll just stand there and do nothing. I mean, literally, look at this lady. She's doing literally nothing, and I'm just standing right in front of her. Yeah, you're my enemy, so you could attack me. I also find some of the choices of enemies for certain time periods a bit baffling, such as those in feudal Japan and in ancient Egypt. Although it is kind of hilarious to use a rocket on a sumo wrestler and watch him fly and deflate like a balloon. The boss fights are no better. In fact, all 4 of them are identical in terms of attack patterns and how to attack them. While they use different projectiles for attack, their patterns do not differentiate in any way and they can be pretty easy to dodge. For the selection of bosses, you have a deformed-looking caveman, a tall pharaoh that possesses the personality of Totally Kyle, a samurai warrior with a bit of political incorrectness of Japan itself, and the Rainmaker for the Wild West, which I question the most. You have all of these other known figures pertaining to the Old West, and the developers went with this odd-looking English gentleman. I mean, seriously, that's not the Rainmaker. That's the Rainmaker! It's a really good film, by the way. As I mentioned, all of these guys fight the same way. The only boss that fights differently is the final fight with Chaos. Sadly, all that fight boils down to is a game of rock, paper, scissors, where all that's needed from you is to jump to become the animal Chaos is vulnerable to and hit him. In this case, the cat hits the mouse hits the elephant hits the cat. So what's the gameplay like overall? Not really exciting or thrilling. Considering that this game was released in 2001, I was expecting much more from the gameplay, such as puzzles, side quests, different interactions, minigames, and even more time periods to explore. Why not send Sabrina to other places in history, such as the Roman Empire, or ancient China, or England, or even the land of Persia? You could have had her tangled with dinosaurs if it meant increasing the longevity of the game. As is, you have a game that you can sit down and easily beat from start to finish in about 2 hours tops, with more to be desired. Graphically, the game is kind of a miss. While it uses a variety of colors pretty well, the details of the characters and locations are not all that good. With the exception of Sabrina herself and maybe, just maybe, Salem, despite him looking so goddamn creepy, everything else is lucrative. Some things are too blocky while others are too sharp with the polygons. Given its release date, the developers could have pushed the PlayStation's graphical capabilities to the max as other late titles were. Spyro Year of the Dragon was able to achieve better attention to details to the visuals, and that was released the year before. Much of the levels are rather bland, with not too much stuff popping out as magical or ecstatic. There's also elements that can be misleading in figuring out what's hazardous, such as water, which I never thought would hurt Sabrina. Some would argue since Sabrina's a witch, she can be hurt by liquid water like any other, but it seems pretty weak to strengthen since she's only half a witch. So she could have developed tolerance to water. I think the best looking visuals are in the CG cutscenes. Although bizarre, the visuals are well rendered and stays true to its source material. While the controls are not the worst, there are a few serious issues. To start with, the movement of Sabrina is very sluggish. She doesn't respond as fast as you give her a direction to go, which can result in awkward pacing. Even though the game is compatible with the DualShock, the analog stick does very little, and I mean very little, to improve navigation. The jumping feels kind of delayed as it's not synced to the exact moment Sabrina jumps. Because of this, there will be moments when you jump from one platform to another with a weary feeling that you're sure to miss in combination with the uncertain distance between you and the platform. The most horrific part is the camera. While you're able to rotate the camera, it's pretty broken. When you move around to a number of directions, the camera will stay fixed on that angle, not being able to see what's in front of you. You can try to remedy this by holding triangle to look what's in front, but it's random on when the camera sets itself back because of it. This causes major issues with platforming as well as fighting off enemies. You can also miss items that were in plain sight because of how the camera was set. Even though it's not as broken as in games like Bubsy 3D, this should be taken with a grain of salt and don't expect Super Mario 64 cameras. The sound for this game is actually really good. With the exception of the main menu, the music is not all catchy or memorable. The sound effects? Pretty dazzling. Everything from footsteps to casting spells are pretty consistent. For the voice cast, you have Melissa Joan Hart voicing Sabrina herself alongside Nick Bakey as Salem, which is a huge plus for any licensed video game adaptation. There's also D. Bradley Baker, whom has a long and impressive resume in voice acting with series including Codename Kid Next Door, American Dad, Gravity Falls, and Star Wars Rebels. The issue with Sabrina's lines is that almost every time you pick up an item or do something, she'll say the same phrases, which can become very irritating. Same goes with Salem, although some things he says are kind of hurtful and stereotypical.
There are mean old miners in...
These lines does have the same cheesiness to the humor, but not when it repeats itself. Compared to the PC games of Sabrina, this game is like a breath of fresh air as it attempts to implement an adventure scenario for the character as a platformer, and if more care and time went into it, this game could have been solid. Sadly, A Twitch in Time comes off feeling in some ways a rip-off of Barbie Explorer, which also ripped off Tomb Raider. The game itself isn't expensive, but with what it has going, you're better off putting in 2 hours playing something else. I can only see this game being appealing to kids or those that enjoyed the show itself, but even those charms won't last long. So thank you for watching, and as always, I'm Riley Sky. Take care.